Daniel Harker was not the kind of man you could recognize in a crowd, and maybe that was what made him so terrifying. He didn't look like a monster, he didn't act like one in public, and there was nothing in his background that screamed danger. People who grew up with him said he was quiet, kept to himself, never caused trouble in school, never even raised his voice. But behind that calm face, something darker lived, something so inhuman that by the late 1980s, entire towns whispered his name in fear. They called him the Butcher of Eastmoor. At first, nobody believed one man could be responsible for so much death. The murder seemed random. A young woman found in an alley with her throat cut from ear to ear. A family of 3 discovered in their own home. Locked from the inside, no sign of forced entry. A hitchhiker who disappeared only for her body to turn up days. Later, in a drainage ditch, her eyes gouged out. There was no pattern, no motive, no link. Police from different states argued over whether they were dealing with one killer or a dozen. But the truth was worse. It was one man, and he was only just beginning. By the time Daniel was caught, he had confessed to 37 murders, each one carried out with the same cold precision, the same cruel lack of humanity. He didn't care about who they were. He didn't stalk them for weeks or learn their habits like most killers. He simply saw people as opportunities. A stranger crossing his path at the wrong time could be marked for death without ever realizing it. Survivors, those rare ones who narrowly escaped, said that Harker's eyes were the last thing they remembered. Not because they looked angry, but because they looked empty. It was like he wasn't even there when he attacked, just a hollow shell driven by something else. When he was finally caught, it wasn't the result of careful police work. It was luck. A patrol officer in Indiana stopped him for a broken taillight. Inside the trunk of his car, they found the body of a teenage boy, freshly killed. That was enough to unravel everything. Harker was arrested, and within weeks, his calm confession opened the door to horrors police didn't even know existed. He listed the names, the towns, the bodies that had never been found. He described things that only the killer could know, and he did it with a grin, as though confessing was another game to him. In court, the families of the victims sat in the front rows, some clutching photos, some weeping, some screaming out for vengeance. And Daniel? He just smiled at them. Sometimes he would lean forward and whisper their names, not the names of the people in court, but the names of the dead, repeating them until the family members broke down. The judge had to threaten him with contempt just to keep him quiet, but it never stopped him. He enjoyed their suffering. He fed on it. The trial lasted months, but in the end, the outcome was obvious. Life without parole, 37 counts of murder, and no possibility of release. Some said he should have been executed, but others feared what might happen if they tried. Harker himself seemed unfazed by the sentence. In fact, when the gavel fell, he laughed. Not a wild laugh. Not hysterical, but a slow, steady chuckle that chilled everyone in the room. He was taken to Blackstone Prison, one of the oldest, most notorious penitentiaries in the country, a place where men went in and rarely came out. The prison was built like a fortress, with crumbling stone walls, iron gates, and endless dark hallways that echoed with misery. It was the perfect cage for a monster, but something was wrong from the start. Guards reported that Harker never slept. Night after night during their rounds, they would pass his cell and find him sitting on the edge of his bed, wide awake, staring at the wall with that same thin grin on his face. Sometimes his lips moved, as if he was talking to someone, but when asked, he would only chuckle. Inmates in nearby cells began complaining of strange noises at night. Knocking sounds on the pipes, faint whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, words that weren't quite English, words that made their blood run cold. One inmate swore he saw Harker standing outside his cell in the middle of the night, staring at him through the bars, even though Harker's own cell was locked and sealed on the other side of the block. Nobody believed him, at least not at first. Harker had a way of getting under people's skin. Guards who worked his block too long often quit or requested transfers. They said being near him made the air feel heavier, like you couldn't breathe properly. They said he would watch them with eyes that never blinked. eyes that felt less like human eyes and more like windows into something else. Some guards even started carrying crucifixes or prayer books during their shifts, though none of them would admit it out loud. It was as if everyone knew something was wrong, but nobody wanted to say it. One night, a guard named Thompson was doing his usual rounds when he heard what sounded like humming. It was low at first, almost like a child singing to themselves, and it seemed to be coming from Harker's cell. As Thompson approached, the sound grew louder. He swore it wasn't just one voice, but many layered on top of each other, hundreds of whispers all at once. When he shined his flashlight into the cell, Harker was just sitting there, smiling, lips closed. Thompson quit the next morning without explanation. Even other killers were afraid of him. Blackstone housed some of the worst men in America. Murderers, rapists, gang leaders. But when Harker walked into the yard, conversations died. Nobody approached him, nobody looked at him for too long. He carried no weapons, had no gang behind him, yet nobody dared cross him. Inmates said he wasn't like them. He was something else, something worse. And the strange thing was, no one ever saw him eat. Meals were delivered to his cell like everyone else's, but the trays always came back untouched. Yet he never lost weight. He never looked weak or sick. Some guards joked that maybe he fed on fear, but nobody laughed for long. The more they joked, the more they realized it might not be a joke at all. Rumors spread quickly in a place like Blackstone. Some said Harker had made a deal with the devil. Others claimed he wasn't even human to begin with, just something wearing human skin. Whatever the truth was, one thing was certain. Daniel Harker may have been locked behind bars, but his presence filled the prison like smoke, creeping into every corner, choking everyone who breathed it in. The official record says he killed 37 people before his arrest, but even then, whispers started to spread. Whispers about guards who vanished without a trace, about inmates who went mad overnight, clawing at their own skin until they bled. None of it could be proven. None of it could be written down in official reports. But everyone inside Blackstone knew the butcher of Eastmore had not stopped killing. Prison hadn't ended his hunger. It had only given him more victims. When Daniel Harker was finally found dead in his cell in 1993, many thought the nightmare was finally over. They said he collapsed suddenly. His heart simply gave out in the middle of the night. The official report claimed it was a natural death, a sudden failure of the body. And the warden himself announced to the press that the prison had been rid of its most dangerous inmate. But the men who were there that night told a different story, one that never made it into the records. They said that in the hours before Harker's death, the entire block had grown colder, so cold their breath hung in the air, even though the heating system was running full. They said the lights flickered on and off for minutes at a time, and when they looked through the tiny glass window into his cell, they swore he wasn't alone. Some described shadows on the walls that didn't match his body. Others claimed they heard voices, hundreds of voices muttering in unison. And then, just like that, the noise stopped. They found him lying on the bed, eyes wide open, lips curled into a grin, frozen in a way that looked less like death and more like satisfaction. The prison wasted no time. They buried his body the very next day in the small cemetery on the edge of the grounds. No headstone, no ceremony, just an unmarked grave to ensure he was forgotten. But forgetting Daniel Harker was impossible. Days after his burial, things inside Blackstone began to unravel. The first death was brushed off as coincidence. A guard named Mason, a man with 20 years of experience and no record of trouble, was found in cell block D with his throat slit wide open. The strange part was that his keys, baton and weapon were all untouched, and no one else was in the block that night. The cameras, which rarely failed, went completely black for exactly 3 minutes. The same 3 minutes Mason died. No suspect was ever found, but among the guards, whispers started to spread. They said the cut across his throat was the same kind Harker had used on so many of his victims. A month later, 2 inmates were found dead inside their solitary confinement cells. Each man had been strangled, bruises deep into their necks. But the doors had never been opened. There were no fingerprints, no signs of forced entry, and both men died within minutes of each other, even though they were locked in separate cells. The prison tried to explain it as a violent struggle between inmates and possible staff negligence, but that didn't satisfy anyone. How could men locked behind steel doors, with no contact, end up strangled at the same time? The rumor that Daniel Harker had returned spread like wildfire. Some inmates swore they had heard him laughing in the dark hallways. Others claimed to hear their own names whispered through the vents at night, followed by descriptions of exactly how they would die. The atmosphere in Blackstone became unbearable. Guards began refusing to work the night shift, insisting that something evil had been left behind when Harker died. Some resigned altogether, unable to handle the fear. Those who stayed carried rosaries, Bibles, or small charms for protection, but none of it worked. The bodies kept piling up. A cook was found in the kitchen freezer, his body bent and twisted as though every bone had been broken. A young officer named Green walked into Harker's old cell block during a midnight round and never walked out again. When they found him hours later, he was hanging from the ceiling by his belt, though the ceiling was far too high for him to reach on his own. Another guard, Ellis, reported hearing footsteps follow him for weeks, heavy boots echoing just behind him in empty corridors. One night, he ran through the hallways panicked, and when his fellow officers found him, he was curled in a corner, muttering that Harker was right behind him, whispering his name. By the end of the year, 12 more people, guards and inmates, were dead. Each death was stranger than the last, each one bearing the same cruelty and creativity that Harker himself had shown in life. But the real terror was in the details. Survivors said they recognized his voice. They swore the laughter, the whispers, even the sound of his breathing was unmistakable. Men who had known him in life claimed they smelled the same faint odor of cologne he used to wear. Drifting through the air of empty hallways, it was as if Harker had never left, as if the prison itself had become his body, and the bars and walls were only there to trap everyone else inside with him. The administration fought to cover it up. Official reports blamed inmate violence, unfortunate accidents, even suicides. But the men who lived through it knew better. They had seen things that couldn't be explained. One guard, who refused to ever set foot in Blackstone again, said he watched the cameras one night when they pointed toward Harker's old cell. For a split second he saw him, sitting on the edge of the bed just like he always had, staring at the lens with that grin. The feed went black immediately afterward, and when it came back, the cell was empty, just as it had been for months. The guard swore on his life that what he saw was real. Some tried to destroy what was left of him, to burn the mattress he died on, to tear apart the sheets, even to dig up his body and move it far away from the grounds. But nothing worked. Strange accidents followed anyone who touched his belongings. One officer who cut up the mattress was crushed in a freak elevator accident 2 weeks later. Another who handled the body bag was stabbed to death in a bar. Fight by a stranger he had never met before. The message became clear. Harker was not to be disturbed. And yet, people couldn't stay away. There was something about his legend that drew them in, like moths to a flame. Inmates dared each other to spend a night in his old cell, and those who tried always emerged pale, shaking, sometimes crying uncontrollably. One man refused to speak ever again, his vocal cords intact but his mind broken. Another begged the guards to transfer him to any other prison, claiming that Harker had promised to kill him on the next new moon. When the transfer was denied, the inmate was found dead 2 weeks later, his chest ripped open as if by claws. It was no longer possible to deny it. Daniel Harker may have been declared dead in 1993, but inside the walls of Blackstone, he was still alive in some twisted way. He had found a way to keep killing, even from beyond the grave. Whether it was his spirit, a curse, or something darker than anyone could name, nobody knew. But everyone agreed on one thing: Daniel Harker had not stopped. Death had only freed him from his body, and now he was everywhere. In the walls, in the pipes, in the darkness of the cells. Blackstone had become his hunting ground, and there was no escape. By the time the prison officials decided to seal off cell block D, It was already too late. The damage had been done. Too many men had died. Too many strange things had happened. And the legend of Daniel Harker had grown far beyond what could be controlled. Still, the warden ordered his old cell bricked up, stone by stone, as if walling off the place where he once lived could silence what he had become. Workers dragged their feet during the job, complaining that the bricks felt warm in their hands, almost like they were alive, but the warden pushed them until the job was done. The cell was sealed, the block was closed, and the order was given that no one was to go near it again. But even walls cannot contain the dead. Guards who passed near the sealed block swore they could hear breathing, slow and steady, the sound of a man just behind the bricks waiting. Some claimed to hear scratching at night, nails dragging across the stone, like he was trying to dig his way out. One rookie officer, Ellis, made the mistake of mocking the stories. He told the others that Harker was nothing more than bones rotting under the dirt, that the fear was just in their heads, that they were weak. To prove it, he took a tape recorder and walked down to the sealed cell block just before midnight. His friends told him not to, begged him to leave it alone, but he wanted to be the man who finally proved the prison wasn't haunted. He turned on the recorder and spoke into it, his voice steady, telling the tape there was nothing down there. No ghost, no demon, no killer left behind. But when the tape was played back later, after Ellis's body was found, the recording didn't just capture his voice. At first you hear him laugh nervously, say there's nothing here, and then there's silence. After that, there's breathing, deep, heavy breathing that grows louder and louder until Ellis screams. The tape ends there. They found him the next morning at the foot of the sealed wall, his eyes wide open, his tongue ripped from his mouth, as if someone had reached in and torn it out by hand. The wall behind him was warm to the touch. After Ellis's death, even the bravest officers refused to walk that corridor. The prison quietly shut down the entire block, leaving it to rot. But shutting it down only made the legend grow. Inmates told stories about seeing Harker's shadow in the yard at night, tall and unmoving, watching from the windows of the abandoned wing. Others claimed that he whispered through the vents, promising them freedom in exchange for their lives. A few even said they had seen him in their dreams, standing at the foot of their beds, smiling, asking if they were ready to die. Some woke up with scratches on their arms, though no one else had been near them. By now the prison was falling apart. So many guards had quit that they struggled to keep order. The state debated shutting the place down completely, but too many men were locked inside, too many sentences to carry out, so they kept it open, kept pretending nothing was wrong even as the death toll rose. In the local town, people started telling their own stories. They said if you drove past Blackstone at night, you could see lights flickering in the windows of the abandoned block, even though the power had been cut years before. Some swore they saw a figure standing at the glass, its face too pale, its mouth too wide, its smile unmistakable. A few unlucky ones said they heard their names whispered on the wind as they passed, and those people often didn't live long afterward. The final straw came when a group of contractors was sent in to inspect the old cell block for possible demolition. 3 men went in together, carrying flashlights and clipboards, joking nervously about ghosts. Only one came back out, and he came running, screaming, refusing to speak for days. When he finally calmed down enough to talk, all he could say was that the walls moved, that the bricks pulsed like flesh, that something inside was still alive. His hair had turned gray almost overnight. The other 2 men were never found. Their flashlights and tools were discovered on the floor of the corridor, but no sign of their bodies. Blackstone was shut down after that, abandoned and left to rot on the edge of town. But abandonment did not kill the legend. If anything, it gave Harker more room to grow. Paranormal investigators came, drawn by the stories. Teenagers broke in on dares, some never returning, some running home pale and broken, unwilling to speak of what they saw. A local sheriff once admitted off the record that he had been called to the prison, late one night after reports of screaming. He went in alone, gun drawn, and swore he heard dozens of voices in the dark, all whispering in unison. He said the voices were saying his name. He never set foot near the prison again. Today, the locals still avoid it. They cross the street rather than walk past the gates, and at night, no one dares to drive down the road that leads there. They say the prison is not empty, that it never will be. They say Daniel Harker found a way to cheat death, to anchor himself to the place where he died, and that every brick, every bar, every shadow belongs to him now. Some believe the prison breathes, that if you press your hand against the walls long enough, you will feel the faint rise and fall of lungs. Others believe the entire building is a mouth, waiting to swallow its next victim whole. What is certain is that the killings didn't stop. Even after the shutdown, bodies have been found near the grounds. Hikers, drifters, thrill-seekers who got too close. The deaths are always brutal, always cruel, and always carry the same signature that once belonged to the butcher of Eastmoor. Authorities cover them up as accidents, wild animal attacks, or simple disappearances. But the people who live nearby know better. They whisper that Daniel Harker killed 37 people before prison, 12 more after he died, and that number is still climbing. Those who claim to have seen him recently say he looks exactly the same as he did when alive. Tall, pale, with eyes too dark and a grin too wide. Some say he moves like a shadow, slipping through walls, appearing behind you before you can even blink. Others say he doesn't move at all, that he simply waits, and that if you make the mistake of looking into his eyes, you won't escape. They say you'll be pulled into the prison, whether you're inside its walls or not, trapped in his hunting ground forever. And so the legend continues to grow. Blackstone Prison, abandoned and forgotten by the state, has become something else entirely. It is no longer just a building. It is a graveyard that breathes, a tomb that feeds, a monument to a man who refused to stop killing even after death. Daniel Harker's story is told in whispers, passed from one generation to the next, always with the same warning: don't go near the prison, don't call his name, don't tempt him, because some killers never stop, not even when they're buried, not even when their hearts stop beating. Some killers keep hunting forever, and Daniel Harker is still hunting tonight.